The idea right now is for you to ask all those questions that came into your mind just a little bit too late after the speaker's intervention, and you wish that you'd asked them this question. It's burning, and you have to ask them. Now is the moment. It's also an occasion for our speakers to violently disagree with each other and to point out the errors in their presentations, and also to make some important corrections and commentaries, just so we can get everything clear in our minds. If you can actually make a link between at least two papers, that would be brilliant, with some common themes. I'd like to invite Massimo to begin, because there's something that he wants to say.
Yes, thank you, because I made no intervention before the previous presentations, because it wouldn't have been a question but a reflection, a personal, my own reflection. And now, as a table ronde, I have this possibility. Well, I should run the risk to be the only Islamologue among the speakers of today. And I am sorry for the missed two speeches of tomorrow morning, because the titles are very intriguing, because the first was about the Asmal Husna, the beautiful names of God, because one God with 99 names, and it will be very interesting to know what Safa would have to say about the names of God, like Al-Kahar, Al-Ghalib, the names of power, of strength, in relation with names like Rauf, Muhaimin, or other names. And it will be interesting. The other title is, and I take my starting point from there, the violence, ours and theirs. And this is interesting, because the violence is not a one-way road. The colonialism has been a very violent phenomenon, and this is underplayed today. Starting from both the the papers previously, I was impressed by two things. First is yours, demystification of conscience, demystification de la conscience. Because if there is a demystification of the Bewusstsein, there is also a mystification of the Bewusstsein. And the demystification of the Bewusstsein is, in a sense, forgotten in this kind of distorted communication between civilization today. And both of you used frequently the words subjectivity and objectivity. And starting from this subjectivity and objectivity, I should like to make 2 points. One, the first is about a ghost, a phantom for me in the air, the ghost of Orientalism. Because if we grasp the meaning of Edward Said, of course, Orientalism, we have a way, beside all the exaggerations in the analysis by Said, but Said was able to understand one key of comprehension and of relation of the West with other peoples and other cultures, not only Islamic, but also Chinese or Indian or so on, that is very important because it implies a mystification of the Bewusstsein. And in this sense, I should like to remember again the name of the Egyptian philosopher I quoted this morning Hassan Hanafi, who spoke about the Occidentalism, not istishraq, but istirab. Istishraq is Orientalism, istirab is Occidentalism, and is a sort of reverse of point of view of looking at reality. In this way, there is the necessity to find a subjective and interacting perspective. Because, and this is the second point, I have the impression that because, of course, I am an Islamolog, and so the ghost in the air is the violent Islam, the jihad, the negation of the rights, and so on. But I have the sad impression that we are in a situation like a autistic situation. I mean, we are Leibniz monads, but without windows. Leibniz monads, but without windows. In the sense that we are, any one of us, the West and the Muslim world, entrenched in its castle without paying attention to what is happening outside. And this is the great importance of subjectivity and intersubjectivity. I say this in Husserlian sense, exactly claiming the Husserl points of view of interaction between subjects. And this is the way, because I believe that from one side and the other, there is a sort of autism, really a sort of autism. I am speaking in my world within the walls of my castle, if I can so, and there is outside, I believe that many of you know who was Mohammed Arkoun, who was a teacher for many years here in Paris at the Sorbonne. And Mohammed Arkoun was speaking about the impensé et impensable. But all us, not only the Muslims, but all us Westerns, we have a pensée, but the impossibility to think about other way to be, other way to live. So there is the democracy, only Western democracy. There are no way of other democracies. There is one ethical universal principle, a hard Western universal principle, and so on. So we have to understand that ourselves are in a situation of autistic silence. And for this reason, I believe that is very important to demystify the Bewusstsein and to arrive at a real interdialogical connection from one side and the other. And this is the risk I am running as an Islamolog here now.
That entire question of dialogue and the breaking up of autism takes me to an idea that was present in Guillaume's paper. You spoke briefly of the peculiar quality of Franz Fanon's text, in that it was glossolalic, the glossolalia of the text, in that it managed to actually put into a kind of chorus several different voices, something that Sartre picked up on, I understand. But then you passed straight towards the question of the usage of the radio and the construction of a national voice, which obviously is plural, but still it's this one voice of the radio. And I was wondering if you could just develop this idea of glossolalia, perhaps. And I wonder whether there's a connection between the capacity of one text to make several voices be heard and this ethical imperative of dialogue that Massimo has mentioned.
Oui, c'est bien vu. Oui, je n'avais pas fait le lien, mais oui, c'est le même. C'est la même question. Alors, la question de la glossolalie, non, je ne pourrais pas la développer pour elle-même, mais si tu poses la question, ça résonne aussi avec la question d'Alberto tout à l'heure. C'est peut-être pas un hasard que pour réfléchir à cette question de la polyphonie, disons, pour choisir un mot moins... la polyphonie, je vais chercher dans un texte de Fanon sur la radio. J'évoquais le terrain cinématographique était un terrain intéressant pour réfléchir aussi à cette polyphonie. Je me demande si j'ai pas une difficulté, mais peut-être que c'est une insuffisance de ma part, je ne veux pas dire que c'est une difficulté dans la littérature, peut-être une difficulté à penser cette polyphonie dans la littérature. Alors c'est évidemment complètement paradoxal. Le concept même de polyphonie de Bakhtin, il a d'abord un champ d'application littéraire. On a défini le roman lui-même par justement la capacité à faire entendre des voix. Mais peut-être qu'on se donne alors une notion de voix peut-être un peu sous-déterminée. Donc, je ne sais pas. Il faudrait répondre. Mais je suis tout à fait d'accord. Et du coup, peut-être ça complexifierait un peu cette question de la polyphonie, le modèle de l'intersubjectivité ou du dialogue. En tout cas, dans notre tradition linguistique, le dialogue est à deux pôles. Alors que la polyphonie, on a affaire à des voix chevauchantes, on a une logique du point de vue, une logique perspectiviste, et je ne suis pas sûr qu'on ait... donc on a une logique du quiproquo quand on travaille avec la polyphonie. C'est-à-dire, comment on rend l'équivocité, le quiproquo entre des langages qui ne sont jamais complètement traductibles, comment on peut rendre cette équivocité-là productive, productrice de subjectivité, d'institutions, de règles, de culture, de ce qu'on veut. Mais alors que le modèle du dialogue et l'intersubjectivité, j'ai l'impression, dévalorise systématiquement l'équivoque. L'équivoque et le jeu du quiproquo, le fait de ne pas se comprendre. Alors, je sais pas, en tant que spécialiste de l'islam, philologue, anthropologue, donc aussi anthropologue des langages. Je ne sais pas comment vous percevez ça. Moi, je suis très frappé, par exemple, par une formule de l'anthropologue brésilien Ribeiro de Castro. Il dit l'équivocité n'est pas une limite de la communication, c'est au contraire sa condition de possibilité. C'est parce qu'il y a de l'équivoque, du quiproquo, parce qu'il y a du non traduisible entre différents langages, que du coup la communication devient possible et nécessaire. Et souvent, puisque vous avez commencé votre intervention en épinglant le caractère irénique, bon, c'est mignon, hein. Mais effectivement, bon, c'est peut-être pas encore politique, hein, mais j'ai l'impression que l'irénisme est aussi dans le modèle du dialogue ou de l'intersubjectivité. Je ne sais pas si c'est un modèle qui est exactement à la hauteur, disons, de ce qu'on cherche à penser.
But when under the Babel Tower there was the differentiation of languages, it was a advantage because it was a enrichment of the possibility to communicate. But in any case, we have to find a common ground of communication, because if you speak Arabic and I speak Italian, you don't know Italian and I don't know Arabic, we cannot understand each other, of course. But the problem is to find a way to go beyond the enclosures, so to speak, in our own sensibility, in our own perspective, to understand that there are the possibility to have other perspectives. And the fault of the Islamophobe from one side and the terrorist from the other side is exactly this, that they live in their own field without going outside the boundaries of this field. Once ago, in an interview, I was trying to explain that it's important to know all the revealed books, the monotheistic traditions, and an important politician, Italian important politician, said that I read the Bible, I read the Gospel, and this is enough. This kind of expression, of course, means the absolute impossibility to have not a dialogue, but even a communication on a common ground. And so the glossolalia becomes an obstacle, a very difficult obstacle in this sense.
Yeah, I'm very taken by that point. At the same time as I think and the problem that you pose is obviously a very concrete problem. At the same time as I think there's also a paradox, which I think that at least in its most spectacularly visible polarization, the supposed two sides, let's say just for brevity's sake, the Islamophobe and the terrorist, I think are actually mutually integrally legible. Aside from anything else, because a lot of them, including the Islamist activists found going to Syria with their Islam for Dummies book in English, are speaking the same language, literally. But also because the terms in which the conflict takes place are not just mutually determining, but sometimes at the same terms. That's in a sense why I was posing the question after your talk about this English language, glossy, Daesh Islamic State magazine, because the terminology was uncannily exactly the same as that of the US, right? They had the exact same description in English of what Islamic theology meant, except, so one side said it's just a religion of war, and then the Islamic State response is it's just a religion of war. And it reminded me at that level of, the kind of Guy Debord provocation at the time of the Cold War of saying, actually, you have on the one side the diffuse spectacle, I think was the term for the commodity economy. On the other hand, you have the directed spectacle, and then you just have the integrated one, which is the symbiosis of the two. So I think the problem you pose is a very real one, but it's a very real one for other agents. I don't think it's a very real one for the dominant and let's say spectacular agents in this, who I think seem to me to be very legible to one another. There's no incommensurability of communication between the Islamic State or say the Taliban or whoever and the U.S. national security effort. They perfectly understand each other, also because in the past they often collaborated, but let's leave that whole discussion aside. But I think it is a real problem for other social agents in Muslim majority countries and outside.
But you are completely right in this sense. But from one side, what you have said is the reason why I insist continuously on philology. Of course, with the students, of course, among us here, but the communication with the common people, the communication is, of course, conditioned by the media. But if we would have, inshallah, the possibility to explain through the media exactly what does mean exactly Sharia, for instance, not only jihad, we have spoken today of jihad, but also a term like Sharia. This is completely misunderstood in the normal communication. you are right, because maybe it's not useful to use too much high concepts in common communication. But if we arrive to the possibility to explain exactly what is the meaning of Sharia, which means road, way, path in a direction, does not mean a codex of law. If we only understand, if not we, the common person will understand this difference, it will be a great step further in intercommunication, interdialogue. Well, I dare to hope so,
But
if I am too much optimist.
But the mere call, I think the problem is that the mere call for intercultural, multicultural, interreligious or inter-university discourse runs the risk to reduce itself to be a liberal fiction. I mean, I'm fully understanding what you are kind of promoting. I mean, to bring back a certain historical complexity within the discussion, or to show that jihad is maybe something which is conatus, or like to show that if, for example, we look, because I'm coming from Germany, on the German situation, where you can see that a party which says Islam is no part of Germany now wins one departmental vote after the other, not in absolute terms, but as being the one who have the most progress in voting voices. So going up to 25% in eastern departments of the former GDR, going on to 15% in like departments like Baden-Württemberg. So and to intervene in that kind of opposition, Islamophobia versus the increase of political religion, which is not only Islam. I think that is something that hasn't been said here, and is, I think, maybe for everyone of us taken for granted, but in the public discourse is always shrinking down to the Islam religion. So I think the question we have to pose is how to construct this space and this time in which the complex reflection would matter. And I would say, be it the university, who at the moment is kind of
it's the space of education. The space of education is only space.
Yeah, it's a space of education which is at the moment under a fierce neoliberal attack, which is really a bit broken apart. So that kind of traditional space of complex discussion, which had also, I mean, at least since the last cycle of 68, had a certain kind of political appeal of an interventionist knowledge, I think is really shrinking down. I mean, this conference is a good example. We are meeting for this theme after this Charlie Hebdo thing, and it's a discussion under a couple of people working on certain themes, and this is no exception. It's very often that academic conferences. So what I would like to say is, for me, the question would be how to construct this space. And I would say that huge rise of political religion has also to do with the decline of the anti-colonial struggles, the decline of the anti-imperialist and left. And the political religion could also kind of, from space to, penetrate this corrupted and abandoned space, so that now, if I speak with kids in my neighborhood, if I see that the anger and of young migrant kids in my surrounding, that political religion is the option. Anti-Semitism is the option, and one has to kind of struggle within that space. But to struggle in that space, you would have to construct something. I mean, something other than an appeal for intercultural discussion, and something else like the normalcy of academic meetings and conferences and so on. This is, I think, at the moment, I don't see so much starting points of that such a space people would work on that, or that there would be a starting point of a kind of intellectual but also political organization who would have which change the quality of such a conversation.
I don't want to monopolize the discussion.
Go ahead.
But no, the input is interesting, but apart from what we have said ad abundantiam about the difference of languages, the richness of the difference of languages, the necessity to find a common ground of the intersubjectivity, of a conquest, a demystification of Bewusstsein and so on. But the problem is that if we put ourselves in the perspective of Abrahamic tradition, all the Abrahamic tradition is political. There is no monotheistic religions which is not political. Political theology is, or theological politics, is the very basis of monotheism. Sure you know the position of Jan Aspan about this issue. And the debate is in a sense closed from this point of view. All the monotheistic religions are political. And the first political religion has been the Jewish religion, when there is the identification of the elected people with the plane of God. Christianity is political religion because through incarnation of God in Christ, it involves the creation of a church, and the church is a political body. Islam is a political religion because, of course, claims to a public space, to occupy the public space, not from the state point of view, but from the society point of view. In this sense, paradoxically, we can say that the contact and the interaction between Judaism, Christianity, and Islam should be easier, because not only they share the common roots of revelation of the unity of God, even if Christianism, from the point of view of the God oneness, can be questioned, because the idea of Trinity could be questioned. But in any case, the idea of domexousia starting and present also in Christianity. But not only there is this kind of common ground in the Abrahamic roots of monotheism, but there is the problem of a common reference to politics. When, I don't know if you know the name of a famous, in Italy, is a very famous philosopher, Gianni Vattimo. Gianni Vattimo, when speaks about the weakening of the essence of God in the incarnation of Christ, says that there is also a weakening of political theology. But from my point of view, it is exactly the contrary, because in the same moment in which there is the incarnation of God in a man, and Jesus is not guilty of this, of course, because all the construction, Jesus didn't know to be a Christian, of course, but this kind of construction is not a weakening of the essence and political theology, but a strengthening of political theology through incarnation. But in any way, we are coming far from our starting point. It's paradoxical that the problem of political theology, the problem of the common Abrahamic roots and so on, must be really the possibility to go beyond the difference of languages. And the paradox is that, as I said before, we are today like Leibniz monads without windows. Because if the windows were open, the eyes wide shut, like in the Stanley Kubrick movie, maybe it would be a easier connection between our civilization. They are the same. Islamic civilization of the West is not different from the West. Is the same civilization of the West with the same basis, the same history in the Mediterranean and around, the same philosophical tradition and so on. And so this is a possibility, a chance to be used to find how, I don't know, because I am not a wizard of Oz, but there is the possibility to arrive at communication through education, especially.
There's another question. Yes.
C'est incroyable comment la mémoire fonctionne, parce qu'en écoutant le professeur allemand, je me souviens, comme j'étais à l'université de droit, comme je m'ennuyais, je voulais écouter autre chose, j'étais à l'université de sociologie. Madame, je pense au travail actuel. Il y a plus de 20 ans, les étudiants de sociologie à l'université du Tübingen avaient fait un travail formidable sur l'image de l'islam dans les médias. Plus de 20 ans. Et vous pouvez le trouver, il est formidable. Seulement maintenant, les choses, c'est 4 fois, 5 fois, 6 fois exagéré. D'autant plus, souvent on entend parler de l'islam, c'est pas ma spécialité. Mais seulement, quelquefois, il faut chercher dans la politique tout ça. C'est pas la religion. Il y a la politique derrière ça. Ich kann Ihnen erklären auf Deutsch nachher. Entschuldigung. So, jetzt wollte ich schnell. Ich habe international Recht gesprochen, gestudiert, aber ich kann leider nicht auf Englisch sehr gut sprechen, das ist sehr wichtig. Okay, wir reden nachher. Okay.
I mean, my French is far from everything, but what I understood is, I mean, like, regarding your last comment, is that if we want to follow the traditional Enlightenment project of bringing complexity through formation, we have to turn this, to my view, into a political question. Who has access to that educational machine? How, this is shrinking down then to very platitudes. But at the end, I would say one has to, in a way, construct that certain mass intellectuality, that those words and those knowledge matters. That means that it is that a mass of people can participate in that dialogue, and that they can, through this, change the conditions of their existence. And at the moment, this is why all those discussions, why no poetry after Auschwitz, etc., etc. The idea of the dialectics between enlightenment and extreme irrationality, that knowledge couldn't stop certain historical catastrophes, which are really like piling up before our. This is something which has to change our approach to the question of the construction of space and time of knowledge. And I have no solution for that, but I think that is one of the very urgent questions, in a way, anyhow, to intervene such a sort of institution which would be between the political and the theoretical or academic space. And,
I'm going to try to synthesize a few things, but in Katja, when you talk about the composition of forces, and I think we might be able to talk about identification or disidentification, where the image used by Daesh or by the CIA of Islam or jihad or whatever terms that are used, insofar as it's able to, and this is a debate going on right now in the United States between an anthropologist named Scott Atran, who's gone and done a lot of interviews. His position is that many of the people involved in political terror are actually thrill seekers, and the image of a caliphate is something that enables them to challenge this, or to channel it, but it's a search for the sublime, is the term they use. And then, on the other hand, we might want to challenge that and say, no, there has to be something specific to these images that enables them to challenge this youthful energy that Atran is positive. But I think the question would be not how we can fight that or analyze it, first of all, and understand it. We would have to work on the level of images, affects, bodies, and peut-être dans la question de voix, mais au niveau de multiplicité de voix dedans chacun de nous. Right? Because when I hear you talking about Boaz or Islam or this sort of thing, my thought is that I can't be autistic versus someone else because I got too many voices inside my own head. I don't have a voice that I pose to someone else. There's 12 voices running around inside me. Donc c'est une multiplicité de pouvoir dedans, c'est une question, mais le pouvoir affectif des voix à l'extérieur et à l'intérieur, c'est peut-être ça au-dessus niveau, at that level of affective force and composition of forces. We might move the discussion towards, which would include images, and also the ability to identify or disidentify, that's my intent to bring before discourses.
Je suis tout à fait convaincu par la synthèse de John. Je pense que vraiment, on peut s'arrêter là.
I mean, just a thought about that. I mean, I wonder if what makes it difficult to take the analysis in the direction that you're suggesting, and also in terms of that multiplicity of voices and what have you, is the reality, but also the screen that's provided by the notion, which is a very ambiguous notion of political religion or religious politics or whatever you want to call it. And I think that's a subjective and an analytical issue. I think that simplification is attractive as a subjective magnet, be it for sublimity or what have you. But it's also attractive in analytical terms. I mean, both academically and in counterinsurgency or whatever you want to call it, which are obviously very linked activities. And I say that because I think we often have these discussions, especially about the link between subjectivity, religion, and violence, as though there were these historically continuous, coherent totalities called, Islam, Christianity, etc. And as though the various subjects and assemblages that attach to them were actually in a substantive and continuous thread. Now, one of the things that I find very striking in looking sometimes even at the Atran material, in any case, it just generally kind of ethnographic material, so to speak, about various forms of what now has been formulated again in this sort of security studies mode as radicalization, which is in itself a whole interesting question. One of the most striking things is that the presupposition of our discourses is that the religious subject of violence is a coherent subject, which is an absurd presupposition if you look at the fact that what is supposed to be like the fanatical subject, the pure, the purely self-ident, like the fantasy of the self-identical subject. It's a bit like the fantasy of Nishayev's catechisms or revolutionary. You're one, you're cold, you have a cause, etc. There's no relationship to the actual biographical and political trajectories of pretty much anyone involved in any, religious, political, who are capable of maintaining a very weird plurality of voices and forms of communication and so on and so forth, to be fully immersed in, this, Western culture while also having supposedly, fervent doctrinal views about this, that, and the other. So I think it's very difficult in having these discussions to avoid the notion of this continuity of subject and totalization of the ideological or belief system within that subject operates. So it's not evident, whilst I don't think like Badiou writing about, 13th of November, I don't think that, ISIS is just, a set of bandits who are using religion. I think it's a lot more. At the same time, there are also very heterogeneous logics, as there have been in the whole history of the relationships between politics and religion, where, there's tons of people involved who are just Ba'athist generals who think it's, a useful conduit for forms of power and profit. And then there are other people who are theologians. People join from, France or England for totally different reasons than people join from Mosul or Raqqa, etc., etc. So it gives, its power, its ability to simplify. But I think the huge political and intellectual danger is to actually think that it is simple and that it is about this form of religious subjectivity, that it is one. And I think that's the illusion. And I think one has to get past that in order to articulate something that goes a little beyond our usual patterns of thinking about the religion between politics and the relationship between politics and religion, which I generally quite.
Well, I have been a bit anticipated by Alberto, but what I want to say is that I find very suggestible this reflection, but I think that in order to build intersubjectivity, dialogue, a common space, another of these things, I think that we need to add a more simple question to all these questions. And if we are, I think that if we want to reflect about what is going in Europe, in Belgium, in Paris, or in Katia's neighborhood, where migrant people are very angry, I think that the main question, the starting question, must be why people who were born and lived in Paris, in London, in Rome, in Stuttgart, why people who were born and lived completely their life there, in many cases, they didn't know Arabic, at a certain point decided to do what they did, and to enroll and to go to Syria, or other of these kind of things. I think that this is this must be the starting question. And it's a more sociological question, I think, and I don't like sociologists, but I think that the starting point must be this, that there's something in Europe that it's a problem, and we have to think about that. Because if not, I think that we risk to miss the point, and to project the problem into Daesh, into religions, into the subject, in a bit disincarnated way. I don't know if I was clear. So I think that for me, the most important question is this one. Why people, young people of this kind, do what they did? Who were completely European, French.
And what's your own answer to this?
there's no only one answer. Of course, there are many causes, but I think my point of view is that we have to start from racism, but not racism as it is theorized commonly, mainly from academic people, but I think that we have to think about racism in another way. What is really racism? What are the real effects of racism on subjectivities, on people, as something which is material and symbolic at the same time? And I think that we don't have to sever what is going on from history. From history and I mean from the last 50 years, for example, with mass migration to Europe, how Europe approached mass migration, these kind of things that are more, how do you say, practical. And that the last thing that I want to say is I think that the African American tradition must say something to our way of reflect about this question. In particular, the relationship within some parts of the African Americans with the Nation of Islam in the United States. I think that there's something we can learn something from that, from what happened in the United States. Of course, I know that the analogies are not completely linear, in a way. Only suggestions.
Let me go to the vast question in a very concrete proposition that actually came up in terms of directions for inquiry. Unless any of the speakers has a good answer to that question available, I think actually we're going to carry on with these questions tomorrow morning.
So thanks to all of our speakers.